Good evening and welcome to GNT's Best Bits, where we reflect on some of the most powerful moments and thought-provoking discussions from the past few weeks. From interviews with global players to intense conversations that made us question the world around us, tonight we bring you the highlights. Well, let's start by looking back at our interview with Sarah Palin, where she shared her perspective on the upcoming US elections.
I'm joined now by the former governor of Alaska and Republican vice president nominee, Sarah Palin. Great to see you. And I know this might seem like old hat because it's a few days ago now, the debate, but people still mulling it over. So let's just start with your thoughts on how it went, especially for Trump.
Yes, thank you so much, Rosanna. And I really appreciate you having me on because it seems like a lot of the mainstream media here in the U.S., they don't want to hear a whole lot of truth telling. They don't want someone who's going to be candid and blunt and calls it like they see it, which I will do. So thank you for having me on. Yes, it's hard to even define what that show was the other night as a debate, because traditionally a debate is where moderators are unbiased and they let both parties speak and articulate their vision, their idea, their experience. And we didn't see that the other night. So again, hard to define it as a debate. Really, it was a 3-on-1 pre-planned corsage where one candidate, Kamala, she was really touched with kid gloves. And the other candidate, Donald Trump, was held to the fire. A lot of fact checking that turned out to be 2 days later, a lot of untruthful fact checking. So tough for the audience to really be educated on what both candidates' positions are and their vision for this country and for the world.
Well, let me respond by saying thank you for being candid. Thank you for being honest. That's exactly what we do want, and it's why we're speaking to you. And we appreciate that honesty in terms of your views. And I'm going to go into some of the policy points of the contenders for the White House. But in terms of the fact checking, I just want to ask why you think Donald Trump was fact-checked more than Harris. You're claiming here that you felt there was bias from the ABC moderators. Why do you think it happened?
I think it's very obvious over here in the U.S. that our mainstream media is quite liberal, and they would love to see a puppet like Kamala Harris be elected, somebody who is actually controlled not by her own convictions and her own experience and her own vision for this country and for the world, but for globalists, really not just socialists, but communists who want to control the people. And Kamala Harris is willing to be that person, as Joe Biden had been that person for a bit there. And Donald Trump, well, he's much more independent, and he has proven that he is for the people. He wants to be elected by the people. Nobody owns him. Nobody's going to control him. And that's why the mainstream media has such a problem with a lot of conservatives and independents, including Donald Trump. So the moderators, the network that hosted that quote unquote debate, it's pretty obvious why it is that they would like to see Kamala Harris elected. And as I say, Rosanna, we're going beyond socialism even here with the positions that are being taken by Kamala Harris and by those who are controlling her and her message. And we're going to head into communism here in America if things don't go the right way in this upcoming election.
Well, you've said so many things there I want to ask you about. So let's talk about the puppet idea, or what you're asserting is reality there of Harris being the puppet and being controlled from behind by people with a globalist agenda, a socialist agenda, a communist agenda. If that is the case, when did that start happening, do you think, in the White House?
Well, I think for decades there have been the uniparty, the globalists who want to control the people and take away individual rights. But it's being really made manifest much more aggressively and clearly as of late with a candidate like Kamala, who, remember, she has never won a primary. She's never had to really show her mettle and show what it is as convictions, internal convictions about what she believes in, about what she has done via her experience, her background, to put her in a position of being educated and informed and prepared to be the leader of the free world. She hasn't had to do any of that. So she's been a convenient pick for the globalists who do want to control the people. She's been a convenient mouthpiece for them as of late. So it's really been more aggressive and more clear just in the last couple of years.
I'll come back to the globalist piece because I think it's particularly interesting when we think about foreign policy, which you have a big career in. So I will come back to that. But I also want to pick up on the point that you described Donald Trump there just previously as an independent within the realm of conservatives. Talk to me about that. Do you consider him to be sort of outside the Republican Party almost, even though he is running as a Republican contender?
Yes, and that's a really good question. Once in a while, I'm asked that question also as how I can be a Republican and yet be so far removed from the Republican establishment, the mechanisms, the machine that actually runs the Republican Party nationally, and in my case, in the state of Alaska. Where people are so obsessed with partisanship and with labels and with positions within the party that they let partisanship get in the way of just doing what's right for the people. Well, Donald Trump has never been a part of that. Remember, he had been a Democrat for many years and quite independent, but recognized that it's the Republican platform that is best for America in order for our ability to perpetuate the blessings that we have today. We don't want to lose those for generations to come. So it's the Republican platform that is best, that makes the most sense for the people. So Donald Trump recognized that, jumps on board in the Republican Party, and has gone forth. So he does butt heads, as do I, with many in the Republican Party. And that, by definition, would make us much more independent. We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us. We can just do what's right via the Constitution, that blueprint towards a more perfect union. We get to follow that with that internal conviction that what we're doing is right for the people.
And should you be operating under a different label then, or amongst a different party? You're saying we then, so I assume you mean people like yourself. You've clearly publicly endorsed Donald Trump for both election campaigns, for all of his election campaigns. I mean, I'm talking here about Republicans turning against Trump, the Cheneys most notably in recent days, former Vice President Dick Cheney, his daughter, as well as many other influential Republicans. So what are we seeing here? Is there even a Republican Party as we recognize it anymore?
Another good question, Rosanna, because there was a lot of talk about the need for a third party, for more independent Americans who traditionally perhaps had been registered as Democrats or Republicans, but are just sick of the partisanship getting in the way of just doing what's right and allowing people to have freedom and government trusting the people to make their own decisions. We make decisions better than faceless, nameless bureaucrats in some far-off bubble in Washington, D.C. They need to trust the people. So quite often, neither party represents that. Certainly the Democrats do not represent that. They're very blatant and bold now about taking away individual rights and freedom from Americans. At least the Republican Party, our platform, still sticks to that conviction. But that's a good question because there is a lot of talk about the need for a third party, more independent. Now, you mentioned a few of the high-profile Republicans who aren't supporting Donald Trump. Recently, the Drudge Report came out with a headline saying, Palin, I am the only living GOP nominee for the higher office to be supporting Trump. And I look back and I thought, well, they're right. Well, these others who aren't supporting Donald Trump, when you look back at their history and what it is they really stand for, they didn't necessarily stand on the planks in the Republican platform. I do. And that's why it's been easy for me to endorse, to support the one candidate who remembers what being an American is all about and the freedom that we cherish. So you point that out, and that's very accurate that no, some high profile Republicans, they don't support Donald Trump, but that's okay because there are a whole lot of independents, many Democrats leaving their party knowing that, well, essentially it's the Democrat Party who have left them, and they're just seeking that freedom, that experience that's needed to be the leader of the free world, and they see that in Donald Trump.
A lot of the Republicans that have turned away the more traditional GOP party members in the last few months have talked about Trump's rhetoric, turning them off, basically. They can't get behind a man who says quite sensationalist things. That's no secret. He's been doing it for years. Let's talk about what he said in the debate, for example. I know you're probably sick to death of hearing it. It's been all the headlines. But residents of Springfield having their cats and dogs eaten by immigrants, that was the big takeaway line. Was it a distraction that he said that away from immigration policy?
No, because this morning there are reports of Haitian immigrants and illegal immigrants who culturally it's okay for them to eat a cat or a dog. And they're seeing reports now that are proving that Trump wouldn't have said that had he not known that there were some facts there but behind that quote unquote rhetoric. It wasn't rhetoric, it was a fact. But what we refer to over here, Rosanna, when people talk about that Trump rhetoric, you know, we like to kind of the running joke, the verbiage we use is, well, those mean tweets of Donald Trump. You know what? I'll take a mean tweet over a failed policy, the control of the people, all those parts of that globalist uniparty agenda that Kamala Harris represents. I'll take a mean tweet over that any day. Now, in the debate, yeah, there is some talk now about, oh, Trump had some rhetoric here or there that some people maybe felt uncomfortable hearing. I felt uncomfortable hearing the lies coming from Kamala Harris. She said lie after lie, and she was not held to account. And that's a shame because the people here, we want to do our own homework. We want to have information so that we can, to the best of our ability, know who it is who is offering themselves up in the name of service. So we do have the best leader that we can elect. Now, Kamala Harris, you've probably seen the bullet points of all the lies that she spewed. She said, just recently, she's against fracking. She's against that resource development that we need to be energy independent in America. And then in the debate, you know, she denies that. She said, oh, there's no state in America that is conducting abortions up until birth. Yeah, there are. There are 6 or 7 states that allow 0 gestational age to be considered with abortion. So she lied on that. She lied about the unvetted illegal aliens coming over our border, our open border, and how that adversely affects our economies, our culture. She lied about her role in that. So it's been lie after lie. I would rather hear a mean tweet, again, over a lie being spewed from a candidate.
Back in 2011, you said it's time that a woman is president of the United States of America. Of course, you had your own run at high office. You were governor of Alaska. You've held many high positions, but the U.S. still hasn't had a woman as president. It's clear you don't think Harris is that woman.
No, doggone it. You know, I do. I would love to see a woman president in the U.S., and it can't be Kamala Harris. No, she's ill-equipped. She's not qualified and very ill-prepared. So no, she should not be our first female president. And that's what I mean when I refer to the debate, quote unquote, debate the other night, where one candidate was touched with kid gloves, and the other one, there was harsher treatment of him. Unfortunately, it was the female candidate whom I believe people thought, oh, you know, you got to kind of back off, don't hold her to account, be nice to her, because unfortunately, you know, she likes to play the victim, even when it comes to gender. And that's unfortunate. I want a strong woman. Americans want a strong woman if we're going to have one as the first female president, someone who is experienced, someone who understands the administrative role that is the presidency, and someone who is just bound by that Constitution and will stick to it and not let other people tell her what to do if it goes against our Constitution. That's not Kamala Harris.
Can you see any of those women in the Republican Party? Why haven't those contenders been put up for election?
Well, I think now is the time for more female candidates to really rise up, if you will, and allow what it is that they have done via experience and their vision for our country to be articulated and to be understood. Now is the time for female candidates all over the world, I wish. You know, I hope that perspective that perhaps a female could bring to the office of presidency or any of these other high offices. And, you know, I look forward to that time because Americans are ready for that. like me, where we've grown up in a place here in Alaska, Rosanna, where gender isn't an issue. You know, the females, the women, the girls, we're expected to work as hard as the guys. We're expected to provide for our families, literally, even practically speaking, like, because we live off the grid quite often. We get kicked off the grid. So making sure that we have energy supplies ourselves, the women do it, making sure that we can harvest our own protein to feed our own families. It hasn't been like a man's role to do that. It's been, hey, anybody willing to do it in order to survive in less than ideal conditions, you got to do it. So I'm fortunate that I have grown up in a family, in a community, in a state where gender hasn't been an issue.
Look, Sarah Palin, you've been very generous with your answers. It's been great speaking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
So I'm joined now by Professor Martin Luther King III, a human rights advocate and son of the iconic civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was sadly assassinated 56 years ago. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya News. Great to have you with us. Can I just start by asking for your reaction to these two attempts on Donald Trump's life in as many months?
Well, I think, first of all, a climate has been created, and it's very tragic that in the process of a political election, that violence is attempting to be engaged in. And I think we all have to examine what is going on in our society that dictates this kind of tragic behavior. And I also think that everyone needs to speak up when something like this happens, because political violence, period, should not have a place in our society or world. However, it does exist. I think it's helpful when we can tone down some rhetoric that contributes. You can't talk about civility and peace, and yet your rhetoric is about hostility and animosity and anger from any side. So, I won't speak specifically about the former president, other than to say that we're grateful that this alleged or attempted political violence, nothing has happened. And we're certainly on high alert as a society, but our society's got to do better because we are drifting into a pathway that is not sustainable. My dad used to talk about nonviolence and saying that we must learn nonviolence or we may face non-existence as a society. And this kind of thing, unfortunately, in terms of not understanding how to navigate in a civil way, it can be dangerous anywhere in the world. And it is happening tragically all over the world. But I think a lot of things, whatever happens in the United States, a lot of people focus on. And so if the United States is exhibiting a certain kind of behavior, then probably the world believes, okay, well, the United States is doing it, then it's all right for that to happen. And it really is not all right for uncivil behavior to occur. People get mad, so we understand that. That's okay, but you can tone down your rhetoric. You can tone down some of your activities, and we can learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. My mom and father showed us that throughout their lives, and many others in the political arena. My mom and dad were not politically elected, but they have those who've worked together in the Democratic and Republican Party over the years. That's how we've gotten anything done.
Yeah, I was going to say, from an outsider's point of view, it really does feel like the US has become increasingly polarized politically and increasingly violent in turn. So it's not just an outsider's perception. You said it there in your answer, a climate has been created in which these kind of things are happening. Who's created it?
I would say that it's been created just in general in society. And so this has been happening now for quite a long time. I must say that the former president is one of the largest propagators of creating certain issues because of the way he chooses to communicate. You can certainly still propagate issues in a different kind of way, and it does not exhibit this kind of crazy behavior. So it's not one side or the other. It is the total discourse. But certainly the former president has put that on steroids in terms of his activity. He'd never admit to that, of course. But you really do have to look at, Michael Jackson would say, look at the man in the mirror. Look at what you're putting out, because what you put out potentially can be what comes back to you. If you sow negative seeds, maybe negative seeds will come back to you. If you sow positive seeds, perhaps positive seeds will come back to you.
Sure. So clearly attempts on the lives of US presidents are nothing new. Really interesting to see just before that latest assassination attempt on Donald Trump, he tweeted, well, he put out on his own platform, Truth Social, I hate Taylor Swift. I mean, you don't get much more hateful hate speech than that, or much more overt hate speech than that, do you?
Well, that's what children do. When you operate from a small kid perspective, and that child needs to be corrected, by the way. So the way that he is acting as a 78-year-old man is like a 5-year-old or 7-year-old child. Children will say things respond certain ways. It is totally inappropriate, unnecessary. Because someone disagrees with your political perspective, then you come out with an attitude like that. That we are better than that. We have to rise above. And if you're going to be a leader, you have to rise above, because everybody's not going to agree with you. Leadership is responsible for bringing people together, even when you disagree.
What's been the nature of your encounters with Donald Trump? How many times, and what's been the mood like on the occasions that you've actually crossed paths?
I've only met him over the years 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 times. And 2 of those times were before he ran for president, and one of those times was the day before he was inaugurated, which happened to be the King holiday back in 2016. Actually, it was 2017, January 2017. And at that time, it was a very interesting meeting. I thought it was instructive. We were meeting about expanding voting rights. He had said that once he was actually in the Oval Office, he was going to invite us back and we would talk more about it. But that never happened because he was not really interested in voting rights and expanding voting rights. He changed the topic to voter fraud and had been attempting to prove that fraud existed since that time. There still is very little fraud in the United States elections, less than 1%. Yes, we must clean up wherever fraud exists, if it exists. But there's not, we have created laws since that time that he was elected that make it much more difficult for people to vote, much more challenging for the precious right that we all should have. So he never was really interested, obviously, in voter expansion and voting, unless the expansion was for something that directly was going to benefit him. So I've not had any other conversations with him. I think that, whomever is the president, we must be engaged with. My father met with every president who served when he was involved in leadership, from President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon to President Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson to President Johnson and Vice President Humphrey. Those were all the presidents and vice presidents during his tenure. One was Republican, that's Eisenhower and Nixon, and the other 2 presidents were Democratic. And he met with all of them. And I think, again, in leadership, you always have to meet with whomever is the head of state. You have to be willing to engage in the issues that you have concern about for the people of our nation.
I mean, what happened on Sunday must have automatically brought back in your mind traumatic memories of what happened 56 years ago. What did go through your mind?
Well, I think the first thing was understanding what is happening. So I didn't filter it that way because there was not an actual shooting that we could see. It was described as a shooting, and everybody wants to know, well, really what did happen. A gun was in place, a camera and other things were found, and a person was apprehended. Now, none of that did you know at first. When you first hear an assassination attempt, you wonder, what does this mean? That this has happened once before, and it looks like there's an attempt again. And what is it that is being done that creates this? And again, I think the tragedy from my perspective is that this climate is tolerated and accepted. That's why everybody has a responsibility to stand up and say, this is unacceptable ever. This is never acceptable, and it must never happen. I will say that in a climate where you have everybody can get and anybody can get guns and you have no regulations, it allows this to fester and grow. And we've got to do a better job of how weapons are dispersed and engaged. How anybody can get a gun. That's problematic, and many or some don't seem to realize that. It's fine for responsible gun owners to have guns. I think that these weapons are very specific type of weapons that have been talked about recently, which are assault weapons. Why does a person need an assault weapon, a weapon that can fire 100 bullets in so many seconds? That's kind of insane. And the definition of insanity is doing nothing or doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We have to change that by our behavior. We need to look at what kind of additional laws need to be put in place.
Just carrying on, if you'll allow me, talking about your father and what happened more than half a century ago. You were a little boy of 10 when your father was assassinated. What do you actually remember about that day?
Well, I remember actually watching the evening news at 7 p.m. On April 4th of 1968, 56 years ago. And I remember it being announced at about 7:05 p.m. that Dr. Martin Luther King has just been shot. Obviously, your heart sinks and you are frantic. I remember the four of us, we were all in the front room in our den, meaning my siblings and I, and we ran back to Mom and Dad's room, and Mom was preparing to go to Memphis to be with our dad. I remember all of that as if it was yesterday. The commotion, the many people who just started coming to our home. And I remember that whole period, which was obviously a very dark and difficult period for us. I remember a few days after Dad was killed, my mother went to Memphis to lead a march that he was to have led. And she took the three older ones of us, my older sister Yolanda, and my younger brother Dexter, and I. Bernice, my younger sister, stayed in Atlanta. And we came back, that was on April 8th. He was killed April 4th. April 9th, he was eulogized and his funeral took place. But my mother continued in that tradition and led that march. And no one had been captured for his murder. And so I remember almost each one of those days would happen, not every moment of the day. I was hoping that it was just a bad dream, but every day when I would awaken, that bad dream became tragic reality.
It's been just over 60 years since that iconic speech, "I Have a Dream." What do you think your father would make of the state of race relations in the United States in the 21st century?
Well, he'd be very disappointed, but not deterred, because he understood that, every victory that existed. I mean, the goal is to create a nation and world where freedom and justice and equality becomes real for all humankind. We've not reached that mark yet. We've achieved a number of things, certainly from an individual perspective. But when we look at a collective perspective in terms of disparities and poverty in America, when we look at the triple evils that he defined as the evil of poverty, the evil of racism, and the evil of violence and militarism, when you look at those triple evils, unfortunately, it feels as if we've not made the kind of progress that we should have. And we have to figure out, how do we create that climate so that the quality of people's lives can be risen? How do we create a society where racism is abolished and gone? How do we create a society where poverty is reduced? In the wealthiest country on the planet, the United States of America, it is unconscionable that we have thousands and millions of people living in poverty. Some would say over 100 million people who are living at or below the poverty level. That is unacceptable in a country where people have trillion-dollar budgets. There are there's a federal budget that's trillions of dollars, and you have corporation budgets that are billions of dollars. And when you add that all collectively, it's a super amount of trillions of dollars. How do you justify having poverty? There's something wrong with that, and we have not focused on that issue. And we've got to address that, because our society will not be sustainable if we don't figure out at least how we reduce it significantly. The ability is there to do that. We just hadn't identified the will. When ability and will become one, it yields results.
And in terms of fulfilling that dream that your father envisaged, do you think Kamala Harris is the sort of president who might be able to deliver?
Well, I certainly believe that the Vice President Harris, has demonstrated in a very short period of time that she intends to build a team that certainly can help to pursue that dream and vision that Dad had for all people, of freedom, justice, and equality for all humankind, creating opportunity and options, creating more jobs, addressing climate issues that exist in our society. Also reaching across the aisle and working with those who have a different philosophical point of view. That's what we need in leadership, someone who brings us together, not someone who creates barriers and builds walls, but someone who builds bridges. So I certainly believe the Vice President is demonstrated throughout her career, from being a district attorney at a local level to the state's attorney, the attorney general for the state of California, then becoming a United States senator, and then the vice president of the United States. She's consistently demonstrated the leadership that I think is needed for such a time as this.
But don't you think your father would be heartened by the fact that the United States has already had one black president who served 2 terms, and we might be just a month and a half or so away from a second black president being elected, and a woman at that? What do you think he'd make of that? Do you think he'd be surprised, or would he consider that, do you think, just the natural extension of his life's work?
No, I don't think he would be surprised at all. I think the only thing that probably would be a surprise was that it has taken this long to elect a woman. He'd be very pleased that it happens to be a black and an Asian woman. But the fact that we as a nation have purported to be all of these things, and 2024, we're just now getting to the fact where we there's a good possibility, a decent possibility that we will elect a woman. So that would probably be surprising because he would have thought that had already happened, I believe. But I also think Dad was an optimist. And so his objective always was to create the kind of climate, as I say, where we could disagree if we had to, without being disagreeable, without diminishing someone's character, without denigrating someone. It was really about how do we lift people up? How do we bring all boats, create that climate where all boats can can rise? And that's what he and my mom did throughout their lives. That's the leadership that they provided. So again, Dad would be extraordinarily proud of what the United States is poised to do. And he'd be very concerned, however, that regardless of the outcome of this election, still 50% of the country is going to initially be unhappy. So it really is about building these bridges and bringing people in who felt left out. And that's part of the challenge. That's probably the biggest challenge. How do you bring disparate positions together and move forward in a way? Somebody's always going to be unhappy. So you can't create utopia, but you can create an opportunity for people to be heard, respected, treated like human beings, treated with dignity. That's what my father and mother were about.
And you've obviously made it your life's work to carry on promoting much of what your father believed in. And you've got a teenage daughter as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like she's going to carry on your life's work and also that of your father's.
Well, we're very, very excited and proud of our daughter. She's 16 years old, and she's been involved in the struggle since she was maybe 5, 6, 7 years old. And so if she chooses to continue that work, and hopefully she will, we're going to do all we can to support her. We never tell her what to do. These are things that she's identified, from climate change to, gun regulations, responsible gun legislation, to, there's just a variety of issues that she herself has raised. The issue of poverty, she's very concerned about. So hopefully she will always want to work to create a better nation and world for all of God's children. And we're very pleased and proud of who she is.
Do you think she feels a bit of pressure as the granddaughter to carry that mantle?
I'm sure she does, but she carries it very well so that it doesn't seem like it. One of the things she said some years ago was she was asked, does she want to continue to work with her grandparents and walk in their footsteps? And she said, yes, I want to do that, but I also want to make my own footsteps. So I thought as a kid to think about, these are things I want to do. Not that it's not a continuation of what my grandparents did. Yes, I would say there is pressure, but I think she navigates through it very well.
She's right, isn't she? Because of course the world in 2024 is, significantly different than it was in the 1960s. So she's talking more about an extension rather than a copy-paste of her grandfather's and her father's legacy.
Well, that's correct. She has so many ideas. She's extraordinarily creative, and she's collaborative. And that's a good trait to always have when you inherently want to work with others. Leadership does demand that you make sometimes difficult decisions. But if you're able to make those decisions in conjunction with others and help others to come around to certain positions, I think that's a good thing.
Now, this might not be true, so correct me if I'm wrong if it isn't, but when you were born, your mother was reportedly concerned that it would be a burden for you to carry the name that you've carried, and you've had more than 60 years now to reflect on this as a thinking human being. Has this been a burden for you?
So, I never looked at it as a burden from a young age. I think my mother liberated me. And what I mean by that is she said, Martin, you don't have to go to Morehouse College. You don't have to become a minister. You don't have to become a civil and human rights activist. Just be your best self, and we will support you. I ended up going to Morehouse College. I have been involved in civil and human rights. So some of the things that she said, I don't have to do unless you want to. I chose those paths, but I'm thankful that she gave me that freedom, because had she been putting the burden on me, saying, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to be this, that would have been a very miserable set of circumstances. But to allow a child, a young person, to become themselves, and that's the kind of environment we are working to create for our daughter. But you were right, my mom was concerned in 1957. Dad was leading the Montgomery bus boycott, or in 1955, actually. He had led that bus boycott for 381 days. So Mom saw how he emerged as a leader and was known around the community and began to be known around the nation. And she didn't want me to have to carry that burden. But of course, they did choose to name me after Dad. And you know, I think she prepared me as best I can. So I always try to look at it as a blessing and not a burden. I think it's your frame of perspective and reference, because if you think about what is a burden, that's the way you act. But if you think about the many blessings that are derived from using your platform in a positive way, that's wonderful.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. Martin Luther King III, human rights advocate and son of the iconic civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to Al Arabiya News.
I'm joined now by the former National Security Advisor and United States Ambassador to the UN, Ambassador John Bolton. Sir, it's been a couple of days now since the debate. We've had some time to settle it all in. We've got about 8 weeks to go until you guys head to the polls to choose the next president. What are your biggest concerns at the moment?
Well, I think internationally, the world is in a very dangerous place. And as the debate on Tuesday showed, there wasn't a lot of discussion about the challenges that the U.S. faces in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in East Asia with China, and not much attention to it and not much specifics from either of the two candidates. So it's a very, very dangerous world out there. And so far in this very important election, we just haven't heard enough from the candidates, I think, for the people to make a really informed decision.
It is indeed a dangerous world. I was speaking to Leon Panetta just a few days ago, who I know is a sort of colleague, peer of yours, and we were talking about the state of things, China, Russia, Iran, obviously what he sees as threats to the United States and safety and security. If Trump were to re-enter the White House, how would you think relationships with those types of powers would play out over the coming years?
Well, I think with respect to Russia and Ukraine, this would be a very favorable development for Vladimir Putin. Trump was given a chance in the debate to say expressly he favored Ukraine winning the war, this war against Russia's unprovoked aggression, and he wouldn't say it. And I think that tells you all you need to know about which way he would tilt, and it would be very bad for Ukraine. In the Middle East, people think he has more of a record based on his first term, but I can assure you Trump's anecdotal, ad hoc, transactional approach to everything, including national security affairs, means there's no guarantee that he would behave in the second term as he did in the first, and in an already very dangerous situation with Iran's nuclear weapons program, its obvious use of terrorist proxies throughout the region. That we need stability and clear U.S. leadership, not the Trump approach. And in Asia, although he's been critical of China for a number of things, I think if Xi Jinping called him up after the election, if in fact Trump won, and said, Donald, I'm so glad you've been reelected. You know, we've had problems with the U.S. since you departed the White House. Let's get together. We can solve them all again, that Trump would jump at the opportunity. So I think his policies ultimately would be very risky for the U.S. If he were elected.
You know, I was speaking to Sebastian Gorka, who is a strategist to the Trump campaign. You're probably aware of him, in an interview yesterday, and he was talking about the fact that when Trump was in office, there wasn't what's currently happening in Gaza, the conflict there wasn't the war in Ukraine. And he said, you know, put two and two together. Why do you think that is? Kind of baking that sort of correlation causation argument. What do you say to that? Was Trump the arbiter of peace for the world?
No, look, that's Trump's standard line, and he said the war in Ukraine wouldn't have happened if he'd been reelected. The current war in the Middle East wouldn't have happened, and on and on. Who knows? It's a statement that's neither provable nor disprovable. And you know, I think what the Russians were waiting for in the last year and a half of the Trump administration, after the famous phone call with Zelensky, was they were waiting through the COVID pandemic and waiting to see what a second Trump term would look like. But we could have easily seen a reprise of what has already happened. And I think the same applies in many other circumstances. Trump simply says, what Biden did, I would have done the opposite. And that's hardly a policy, and it hardly recognizes there are actually a few things that happen in the world that are not dependent on the United States.
Extraordinary to imagine, yeah. I mean, but of course, economic, military superpower, what happens in the US has ramifications elsewhere. Look, you've touched on Russia a fair bit already. Talk to me about what's visibly happening in terms of the way that Russia's interacting with this EU election, the invisible stuff aside, but the supposed endorsement that Putin gave to Harris. What did you make of that?
Well, I think that's classic, I would say, communist desinformatia in the Russian word. It's disinformation. It allows Trump to say Putin has endorsed my opponent, even though it's pretty clear to me that Putin would love to see Trump reelected. He thinks he's an easy mark. He thinks he can get what he wants from Trump. But he's smart enough, obviously, not to say that in open channels. And he would like to see Trump. That's what they're trying to do with their covert operations. There are a lot of countries, Iran, North Korea, China as well, trying to influence the U.S. election through covert means. It's a very serious threat to our democracy, and I think other democracies around the world. And hopefully we're combating them in cyberspace. But I think people in the U.S. and really more broadly need to understand that the totalitarian governments of the world are trying to fight an asymmetric war against countries that they want to subvert.
But look, Trump bigs himself up about his relationship with North Korea, with being able to deal with people like Vladimir Putin. Is there anything to that in terms of getting those sort of what are sometimes called strongmen in a room with someone like Trump?
Well, you know, Trump says openly that he thinks his personal relations with the head of state, particularly of American adversaries, are an exact description of the state-to-state relationships between the United States and that other country, North Korea or whatever. That's completely wrong. There's certainly a role for personal relations in international affairs, but these hard men, Putin, Xi, Kim, they know what their national interests are, and that's what they pursue. They're not pursuing personal relations. I've been in rooms with Trump and all three of them at different times, and know them otherwise. Look, I think they believe Trump is a laughing fool, and they will take advantage of him accordingly. And that's dangerous for the United States, obviously.
Former U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Now, with foreign policy forming a major pillar of the US election race, I spoke with the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, about the latest developments from the continued Israeli assault on Gaza and ongoing international efforts to find a resolution. I'm now joined by the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert. Thank you for your time. So, look, we're almost a year on from the events of October 7th. Did you ever think that we would be at this point, about 11 months later, with conflict still raging, some hostages still in captivity and some hostages killed?
No, not really. I have to say that I thought, and I said 8 months ago, that At that time, we should have stopped the war. We have achieved almost everything that we could have achieved in a military operation such as this, with all the underground city, which is enormously difficult to fight with. And I thought that the longer we continue, the more likely we are going to lose many of the hostages. And unfortunately, we are now almost a year after October 7th. And we have a very small number of the original number of the hostages still alive. So I think it's a total failure, the Israeli government. No strategy, no vision, no political vision, no military planning, nothing.
I mean, you've been very clear in your words about the current Israeli government. You called Netanyahu and his government a gang recently. In an op-ed for Haaretz, you argued that their ultimate aim is the purging of the West Bank of Palestinians. You use words like Armageddon. Do you stand by those words, and what kind of response have you had to them?
Entirely. Unfortunately, I find myself time and again, which really breaks my heart, that some of the worst possible visions that I have in my mind are unfolding every day in our lives, which is absolutely terrible. Yes, I think that the Messianic groups in the Israeli government, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and all the supporters are absolutely anxious to carry on the war in the south, to expand the war into the north, and to break down the Palestinians in the West Bank. They want an Armageddon. They believe that within the framework of an Armageddon, of a comprehensive, violent confrontation, they will be able to expel the Palestinians from the West Bank and prepare the eventual complete annexation of the territories into the state of Israel. So, as far as they are concerned, maybe it's becoming obvious to many. Problem is that they are fully supported by the Prime Minister. Netanyahu is entirely with them. Whether deep in his heart he may have a different idea, I don't know. But how can you judge a Prime Minister if not by what he does, what he says, who are his partners, who does he support, and what do they support in what he does? And there is a complete partnership between him and the extreme Messianic groups. And this is a serious threat to the future, the stability, the balance, the status of the state of Israel. And there is only one remedy, none other than the overthrowing of the Israeli government. The sooner, the better.
Well, yeah, clearly that unrest or that dim opinion, we could call it politely, of Benjamin Netanyahu has spread not only from the political class, from his opponents in government and outside of government, but to the streets as well. In recent weeks, we're seeing large unrest in places like Tel Aviv with unions going on strike, etc., putting pressure on his government. Do you think enough pressure will be applied by the public that another election will be called?
It's growing. I don't know. I can tell you what I want. I want to try to spread the word. I try to speak up as much as I can in order to influence as many. There is a growing distrust and rage amongst hundreds of thousands, millions of people in Israel. In fact, you have to remember something which is not perhaps emphasized enough in the international media. In an endless number of opinion polls which were taken in Israel since October 7th, 2023 until today, consistently, more than 60% of the Israelis say that they do not trust the Prime Minister. 60% of the people say that they think that the decisions taken by the cabinet under his complete influence are mostly influenced by his personal political and interest rather than the national interest of the state of Israel. So it's true, technically, Netanyahu has a majority of 4 votes in the Knesset. He has 64 votes, and the absolute majority is actually 61. So he has just a very small number of votes, but that does not reflect, at the present time, the real public opinion of the people of Israel. And I expect that this growing distrust will spread further to the point where it will become almost impossible to carry on, and the government will have to call for early elections. And some of the partners of the government will just withdraw from their support one way or another. I hope it will not happen in the streets. There is a danger that sometimes things go out of control. We had a demonstration the other day with close to 400,000 people in the center of Tel Aviv. And there were clashes with police, and the police is under the influence of Ben Gvir. And there are many fears amongst many Israelis that the internal balance, which is the essence of what democracy is all about, is eroding. And I hope it will not reach a point where there will be a violent confrontations between different groups of Israelis, rioters, demonstrators, protesters, and the Israeli police and the Messianic groups that are inspired and influenced and operated by Ben Gvir and their supporters will not clash with others. We are not far from it.
I mean, that's why I find it interesting that we hear this line of reasoning that Benjamin Netanyahu is stalling on a proposed internationally mediated ceasefire deal for supposed political gain, when the picture that you're painting there is it could be a political disadvantage to keep holding off from a ceasefire deal, no?
No, the problem is that the reason he's stalling this deal is very simple. His partners, without which he will not have a majority in parliament and he will collapse momentarily, they say, if he will go for this deal, they will break down the government. So the only reason that he doesn't make the deal that will save the lives of all the remaining living hostages, and we don't know how many of them are alive. We know that there are no more than 101. How many of the 101 are still alive? I wish I knew. I don't know, and I don't think anyone in Israel knows. And perhaps every day that passes will reduce this number. So the reason why Netanyahu doesn't make this deal is very simple. Ben Gvir and Smotrich say that if there will be a deal, there will not be a government. And therefore, he has to make a choice between his continued control over the government or a deal which will save the hostages and which will end the military operations, which will save the lives of many Israeli soldiers that are going to be killed in Gaza just as part of this process of violence and confrontation, and will also save the lives of many Palestinian innocent civilians amongst the Palestinians that are becoming victims because of these unavoidable confrontations that take place sometimes in the urban centers where the Hamas fighters are hiding. So this is the choice. It's very simple. It's very difficult, and for us it's heartbreaking. But there is something that I want to say. In my lifetime, I've been around for quite a long time. I've been in the center of Israeli politics for over 40 years. 9 times elected into parliament, and so on. There is a time when leadership is measured by one thing, the ability of the leader to take a decision which is the opposite of everything that he has been preaching for and supporting all his life. Only because at a time that he needs to take that decision, this is the right thing to do for the people that he is leading. And this was the greatness of Churchill, and the greatness of de Gaulle, and the greatness of Menachem Begin, and the greatness of Yitzhak Rabin, and the greatness of Ariel Sharon. Bibi is not great. He's very small. He's very small. He pretends, he believes that he is a Churchill guy, but he's not even Chamberlain.
Well, as you say, that would take giving up a narrative, something you've preached for, something you have stuck to for so many years, something you have surrounded yourself with in your own government and cabinet, and it would take that sort of bravery to step away from that narrative and change it to do what you think is right now. Tell me this, though, Sarah, if you don't mind, Mr. Olmert. How much is Netanyahu's government listening to those outside of the government, like yourself, like others? I mean, you reportedly signed this agreement with the nephew of former Palestinian Authority President Yasser Arafat back in July, talking about working together to promote peace in the Middle East using the 1967 borders as a basis. Do you think there's any hope at all that your plans, that discussion is being listened to?
I didn't say anything to Arafat. I issued a joint statement with the nephew of Arafat, of Dr. Nasser Kilwa, but this is not something I'm going to discuss now. This is something that we are going to make a joint appearance later this month, and we will talk about it. But if you ask me whether the Israelis, the cabinet ministers, listen to me, the answer is very simple: no. They don't listen to me. They don't listen to anything other than they are captives of their own obsessions and rhetorics and pettiness and aggression and messianic dreams. They live completely separated from the mainstream of what Israel is all about. They are completely separated from the basic fundamental values which have characterized the state of Israel and the Jewish people for so many generations. We are not, in our nature, we are not occupiers. We don't hate. We don't persecute. We don't commit war crimes. We are tolerant, and we are prepared to compromise with our adversaries and our enemies. We know how to fight, and when necessary we fight, and there was no question that we had to destroy the military power of Hamas because of the terrible, terrible atrocities that they have committed against our people and the danger that they have established for the future of the Middle East at all and the state of Israel. But we are far away from where we were supposed to be at the beginning. We destroyed their military power, mostly. And now it's the time to think about the future, to offer a political vision, to end the war, save the hostages, to pull out from Gaza, to start negotiations for a comprehensive peace between us and the Palestinians. But unfortunately, considering the present circumstances, this will mean the end of the political future of Netanyahu and a group of thugs which surround him and encircle him. And therefore, they wouldn't listen to me. They wouldn't listen to the voice of reason. They wouldn't listen to the voice of compromise and compassion, because that will bring an end to their political careers. And for them, this is the most important thing.
So with that in mind, I'm just interested to end by asking why you give interviews like this now. Are you hoping that they will listen, or are you speaking to a different audience?
No, I speak for the people of Israel, to the majority of the people of Israel. Yeah, of course, those who will disagree with me. But I'll tell you something, I measure it every day. I walk in the streets, I go to a restaurant, I go to a store, I meet with people. A number of people that come to me and say, you speak for us, against those who curse me, is maybe one who curses me for every 100 that come to me and want to hug me and to thank me for what I say. I speak to them, and I speak to those who don't see me, but who feel like me, and we share with me the desires, the vision, the dreams, and the ambition to change realities and to end wars, to end losing lives of innocent people, and to start embark on what will ultimately become the momentum for peace.
Former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for this special edition of GNT's Best Bits. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and do join us again very soon for some more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.